Hey girl, let's talk crime. My name is Angel and welcome to my channel. It is just so different from recording a 60-second video for TikTok as opposed to recording and editing a 60-minute video for YouTube. So I'm trying to get my life together. Bear with me. I am from Indiana, and the case that we are going to be talking about today is one of the most infamous cases that have happened here. Sylvia Likens. Let's just hop right in. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3rd, 1949 in Lebanon, Indiana, and she was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Likens and his wife Elizabeth Francis. Fun fact, Sylvia was born between 2 sets of twins. Diana and Daniel were older than her, and her younger siblings Jenny and Benny. So her younger sister Jenny suffered from polio. She had a limp and she wore a brace on one of her legs. Lester and Elizabeth's marriage was anything but solid. They frequently moved around selling candy and beer at different carnival stands, and this type of unstable income caused a lot of financial difficulty for the family. Their sons would often go with them to assist, but their parents weren't a fan of Jenny or Sylvia traveling because of, 1, their concern for their safety, and also 2, they wanted to ensure that they got an education. Girls would often stay with other relatives, mostly their grandmother. As a teenager, Sylvia would often earn money by babysitting or running errands or doing different type of chores for friends and family. She would also give part of her earnings to her mother to help out around the house. People would describe Sylvia as really confident, super friendly, and I guess today we would describe her as a vibe. She was affectionately known as Cookie to her friends, and although she was really beautiful, she would tend to cover her mouth when she would smile because she had lost her front tooth when she was a child while wrestling with one of her brothers. She loved music. The Beatles were one of her favorite, and she did not play when it came to her little sister Jenny. So in July of 1965, Sylvia's parents had separated and she and Jenny were living with her mother in Indianapolis. But Elizabeth was arrested for shoplifting, and their father Lester wanted to be more stable, and so he wanted to go back out on the road. Eventually he had a conversation with a woman named Gertrude Baniszewski. I can't tell you guys how many times I have said this name, which was the mother of one of Sylvia's new friends at school, 17-year-old Paula. Gertrude was born on September 19th, 1928. She was born in Indianapolis to her parents, Molly Myrtle and Hugh Marcus. She was the third of 6 children, and in 1939, she had witnessed her father, who had died from a sudden heart attack at just 50 years old. 6 years later, when she was 16 years old, she dropped out of high school and ended up marrying 18-year-old John Baniszewski. They had 4 children together. According to Gertrude, John was extremely violent and he would often beat her. She would remain in this marriage for 10 years. Once they were divorced, she then married a man named Edward Guthrie, and this marriage lasted a mere 3 months before they were divorced. She then remarried her first husband, John, and they had 2 more children. They divorced again in 1963. A few weeks after her third marriage, she had no problem moving on. She then began dating a man who was 22 years old who also physically abused her by the name of Dennis Wright. Shortly after the birth of their son, he abandoned both of them. By 1965, Gertrude was 36 years old. She was living alone with her 7 children: Paula, who was 17, Stephanie, who was 15, John, who was 12, Marie, who was 11, Shirley, who was 10, James, who was 8, and Dennis Lee, who was 1 year old. She was described as a haggard, underweight asthmatic. She was a chain smoker and she struggled a lot with depression. She would receive money from her first husband, who was an Indianapolis police officer, and that would barely come in, so she would also do other random jobs to support her children, like cleaning houses or running errands for other people. She was living at 3850 East New York Street, where her rent was $55 a month. To be a renter in 1965. Back to the agreement. So Lester would pay Gertrude $20 a week to care for his daughters until he returned. Right after July 4th, Sylvia and Jenny moved into the home at 3850 East New York Street, and their father, who would later be joined by their mother, could travel to the East Coast, make some money while doing the carnival, and come back in November to pick Jenny and Sylvia up. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. The girls would participate in chores. They would go to church with the other children. And Sylvia and Stephanie, which is Gertrude's 15-year-old daughter, would have fun singing and dancing together. And it just seemed like a really good arrangement. After the first 2 weeks, the weekly fee of $20 would begin to arrive late. Sometimes it would arrive 2 days late, sometimes just one. The more this happened, the more Gertrude would take out her frustrations on Sylvia and Jenny by whooping them with a paddle and other random objects. She would say things like, "I took care of you two little bitches for a week, and for what?" In late August, Paula, who was 17 at the time, told her mother that Jenny and Sylvia had eaten a lot of food at the church supper, and they were beaten with a paddle for 15 minutes for this. So by this time, although Jenny would get beat occasionally, Gertrude's focus was primarily on Sylvia, and it was likely due to the fact that she was jealous of her physical appearance and the fact that she had a lot going on in life. She was confident, people loved her, and she had dreams. Remember, Gertrude was super depressed. She had 3 failed marriages under her belt. She had also suffered a miscarriage, and instead of focusing on healing and getting her life together, she was miserable and made Sylvia pay for it. She would do things like beat Sylvia and refuse her food, which would lead Sylvia to eat spoiled food or eat food out of the trash can. I'm not sure why only a month into this abuse, why Sylvia or Jenny did not feel comfortable with telling anyone, but they never said anything to their parents or to any of the school staff or friends. Gertrude would humiliate Sylvia. She would make fun of her. On one occasion, Sylvia had claimed to have a boyfriend whom she had met in Long Beach when they lived in California. Gertrude asked her if she had ever done anything with a boy, and Sylvia, not understanding exactly what she was trying to get at, said, "I guess," mentioning that she had went skating with a boy and that she had laid under the covers. Gertrude was messing with her mental and said her stomach was getting big and that she was going to have a baby. And Sylvia thought that she was just joking, and she was just kind of like, "Yeah, like I need to go on a diet." But Gertrude was not joking, and that's when she kicked Sylvia between the legs. Her daughter Paula, who was overweight and also 3 months pregnant at the time and was extremely jealous of Sylvia, knocked her off of a chair, saying that she wasn't fit to sit in a chair. Like, what is going on? At this point, the abuse for Sylvia was second nature, but it wasn't just Gertrude and her children. Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Lepper once stuffed a hot dog loaded with condiments down Sylvia's throat, so much so that she began to vomit, and she was forced to eat what she had just regurgitated. So at this point, Sylvia was over it, and she had decided that she was going to start a rumor about Paula and Stephanie at school, saying that they were prostitutes. A boy had approached Stephanie, propositioning her jokingly, saying that Sylvia said that she was a prostitute. Once they got home, Stephanie had asked Sylvia if she said this, and Sylvia had responded that she had. Stephanie then punches Sylvia, and Sylvia starts crying and apologizing. Stephanie begins to cry too, but then once Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy, finds out that Sylvia had been saying this, he then slaps her, bangs her head up against the wall, and flips her backwards on the floor. And of course, Gertrude was still getting her licks into, and she beat Sylvia with a paddle. For some reason, Gertrude was set on the fact that Sylvia was a prostitute and would also lecture her on how filthy it was, how filthy she was, and she would often accuse her of being promiscuous. On one occasion, Paula, Gertrude's 17-year-old daughter, had beaten Sylvia in the face so badly that she broke her own wrist. Once she got a cast on it, she used her cast to beat Sylvia even more. Sylvia was occasionally forced to beat Jenny, and when she would not comply, Gertrude would beat her. Coy Hubbard, which was Stephanie's boyfriend, who was 15, and some of his classmates would often visit the house to physically and verbally abuse and torment Sylvia, along with Gertrude and her children. They would burn her. Gertrude would make her strip in front of everyone and masturbate with a Coca-Cola bottle, all because she wanted to prove to Jenny what type of girl her sister was. Eventually, Gertrude stopped allowing Sylvia to go to school after Sylvia had confessed to stealing a jumpsuit that Gertrude had refused to buy. As a punishment for this, she was beaten with a 3-inch wide police belt. And one time when she was getting beat so badly, Gertrude repeatedly started kicking Sylvia in the genitals, and her daughter, Stephanie, had come to her rescue, yelling at her mom like she didn't do anything. But of course, that did not hinder Gertrude, as she burned her fingertips with matches and continued beating her. A few days after that incident, Jenny was beaten after she had stolen a tennis shoe from school so that she could wear it on her strong foot. At this point, they were terrified to tell anyone, thinking that it would worsen their situation. Jenny was threatened that if she ever told anyone, that she would be beaten and abused like her sister Sylvia. July and August, their parents, Lester and Elizabeth, would randomly return back to Indianapolis to visit their daughters every time their schedule would permit. Neither girl showed any signs of abuse, distress, or anything, and I think being in the presence of Gertrude and her children scared them enough to not say anything to their parents. Once their parents would leave, Gertrude would look at Sylvia and say, "What are you going to do now? Now that they're gone, what are you going to do?" Just tormenting her. In September of 1965, the girls had seen their older sister, Diana, which was one of the twins, at a local park. They started telling her of the abuse that they were enduring, saying that Sylvia was being targeted for stuff that she wasn't saying or doing. They never mentioned where they were staying, but the sister just didn't believe them and was sure that they were exaggerating everything that was going on. A few weeks later, they seen Diana again, and this time they were with Gertrude's 11-year-old daughter, Marie. Sylvia was eating a sandwich because she had told her sister that she was hungry. And of course, Sylvia or Jenny didn't say anything, but as soon as Marie got home, she told her mother that Sylvia was eating a sandwich. Gertrude then responded by accusing Sylvia of engaging in gluttony, and she and her daughter both choked and bludgeoned Sylvia. They then gave her a super hot bath to cleanse her of her sins. Gertrude would constantly bang Sylvia's head against the bath every time she would faint to revive her. After this incident, one of the fathers of a neighborhood kid had called Arsenal Technical High School, where she was attending, to make an anonymous report that there was a girl with open sores that he believed was being abused living in the home. Sylvia hadn't been to school for several days at this point, and a nurse had showed up to the house, and Gertrude said that Sylvia had run away because she was out of control, and the open sores that the neighbor was talking about was because she had bad hygiene. The school never investigated Sylvia's welfare any further. The neighbors that lived right next door to Gertrude had witnessed the abuse. They seen Sylvia with a black eye and said that Sylvia seemed zombified in nature, but they never reported this to the authorities. On or around October 1st, Diana, their older sister, had discovered where her sisters were staying, and she tried to visit them. However, Gertrude had prevented that by saying that their parents had made it very clear that they did not want Diana seeing Sylvia or Jenny. She made her leave her property. About 2 weeks later, Diana sees Jenny again. She asked her how Sylvia's doing, and Jenny told her that she can't tell her, that she would get in trouble. Due to the frequent beatings and torture, Sylvia became incontinent. She wasn't allowed to use the restroom. She would go to the bathroom on herself. And as a punishment for her incontinence, on October 6th, she was thrown in the basement, where Gertrude would tie her to the stairs where her feet were barely touching the floor. While in the basement, she was barely fed, she was deprived of water, and she was always kept naked. At this point, Sylvia was so dehydrated that when she would cry, her tears were not visible. Like, you could not see tears come out of her eyes. Prior to being kept in the basement, Gertrude would lie to the kids, saying that Sylvia was insulting them or talking about them, hoping that it would hype them up to continue attacking her. And at one point, she had held a knife to Sylvia, telling her to fight her back, in which Sylvia responded saying that she didn't know how to fight. And I guess that pissed Gertrude off, and so she kind of slashed her leg. Neighborhood children were at times charged 5 cents to see Sylvia's abused body. They would also pay to beat her, to burn her, to humiliate her. With the help of her children and the neighborhood children, they restrained Sylvia, placed her in a bathtub, and would rub salt in all of her open wounds. They would stuff a cloth into her mouth to muffle her screams while they were abusing and torturing her. Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John, would often take Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diapers, his diapers with urine, his diapers with feces, and rub it into Sylvia's mouth. She had told Sylvia that she could sleep upstairs if she would not use the bathroom on herself, but at this point she had no control. The following morning, she realized that Sylvia did use the bathroom on herself, and she forced her to put a Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina in front of the children before she was thrown back into the basement. After this incident, Gertrude made Sylvia come up to the kitchen and told her, "You branded my children and now I will brand you." She begins to carve "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it" into her abdomen with a hot needle. She couldn't finish it because she was getting all squeamish. She then instructed one of the neighborhood kids, 14-year-old Richard Hobbs, to finish the job. Her 11-year-old daughter Marie was responsible for heating up the needle. Gertrude then started taunting her, saying that "You'll never get married, nobody will ever want you," and she was forced to show all of the neighborhood kids, and Gertrude told them that she got it from a sex party. The following day, Gertrude made Sylvia write a letter to mislead her parents as if she had run away. The letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for the abuse and mutilation of Sylvia. So after she writes this letter, she is putting her plan into motion. And that plan was to blindfold Sylvia and take her to a wooded area known as Jemmy's Forest and leave her there to die. She was then tied to the basement stairs again. She was offered crackers, in which Sylvia refused and said to give it to the dog because she did not want them. Gertrude then forces them into her mouth, and she and her 12-year-old son, John, beat her, particularly in the stomach area. On October 25th, 1965, Sylvia tries to escape from the basement after she overhears their conversation about their plan to abandon her, leaving her to die. She was able to get to the front door, but because of her injuries and how extremely weak she was, Gertrude caught her and forced some toast in her mouth. But because she was so dehydrated, she couldn't even consume the toast. She then started beating Sylvia with a curtain rod until it bent, and then Coy Hubbard, which was Stephanie's boyfriend, then hit Sylvia so hard it rendered her unconscious. Gertrude then dragged Sylvia back to the basement. This sounds like a horror film. This is absolutely horrific. When I was researching this, my mouth was like it sounds so unbelievable. That night, Sylvia is screaming for help. She's hitting the walls on the basement. She's doing anything she can to get out. A neighbor reported that she did hear these screams, but that the noise and everything had suddenly stopped at 3 a.m. So she decided to not contact the police. Let's not do that. The morning of October 26th, and mind you, now this abuse has been going on since July, Sylvia was done. She could barely speak, and she couldn't even coordinate the movement of her limbs. Gertrude had taken her upstairs to the kitchen, propped her up against a wall, and attempted to feed her a donut and give her milk. She was so frustrated at the fact that Sylvia could not move the glass to her lips to drink that she took her back to the basement. He attempted to wash Sylvia by bringing in a garden hose at Gertrude's request. Sylvia tried to escape again, but she collapsed before she had even met the basement stairs. Gertrude then stomped on Sylvia's head. Stephanie decides that she's going to give her a warm and soapy bath, even though she wasn't breathing at this point. Stephanie had tried to give Sylvia mouth to mouth while Gertrude was in the background yelling, saying that's faking her death. She then begins to hit Sylvia with a book all over her body, saying, "Stop faking, we know you're faking." She then panics after realizing Sylvia's dead. Tells Richard Hobbs to call the police from a payphone. Police arrive around 6:30 p.m. Gertrude leads them to Sylvia's bludgeoned and mutilated body that's lying on a soiled mattress, and that's when she gives them this letter that she had forced Sylvia to write. She tells them that she had been trying to help her for over an hour prior to her death, and that Sylvia had shown up that afternoon and she was bloodied and she was clutching this note and she just didn't know what it was, which was all part of her sick game. Jenny then whispers to officers, "If you get me out of here, I will tell you everything." Jenny's statement prompted officers to arrest Gertrude, her daughter Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. on suspicion of murder. Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested. Girl, get this. Gertrude initially denied any involvement and said that her daughter, Paula, did the most damage. She said that yes, she had forced Sylvia to sleep in the basement on multiple occasions because she had wet the bed, but took no other responsibility for what happened to Sylvia. Paula, with her no remorse having ass, willingly signs a statement admitting to the fact that she beat Sylvia multiple times. She broke her wrist, hitting Sylvia in the face. She admitted to throwing her down the stairs, giving her a black eye, and being an active participant in the abuse of Sylvia. John Jr. admitted to burning Sylvia with matches multiple times and saying that his mother had burned her with cigarettes on multiple occasions. 5 other neighborhood kids, Michael, Randy, Darlene, Judy, and Anna, were also arrested on October 29th. They were all released to their parents and had to promise to return to trial. So the autopsy of Sylvia's body showed that she had over 150 wounds on her body. There were burns. She had extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut, and her hymen was still intact, which conflicted with what Gertrude said, saying that she was 3 months pregnant. All of her fingernails were broken backwards and most of her skin had begun to peel. Her official cause of death was subdural hematoma, and it was because she had received a blow to her right temple. Sylvia Likens was laid to rest in Lebanon, Indiana on October 29th. More than 100 people had paid their respects. On December 30th, 1965, a Marion County grand jury had indicted Gertrude and 2 of her 3 oldest children, Paul and John, on a first-degree murder. Also indicted were Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard. Gertrude was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In 1985, she was up for parole, and she said that she doesn't remember what happened to Sylvia because the medicine that she was on made her forgetful. She was on drugs. She took absolutely no responsibility for the death of Sylvia, but wishes it never happened. She became somewhat of a den mother while she was in prison. She was a model prisoner, and even though people were protesting her parole, she was granted parole after serving just 20 years. By the time she was released, she had changed her name to Nadine Van Fossen and moved to Iowa. She died from lung cancer on June 16th, 1990. Paula, who also assumed a new identity after she was paroled in 1972, after only serving 7 years, worked as an aide to a school counselor for 14 years in Iowa until they discovered her true identity, and then she was fired. She apparently lives in Iowa. She's married and has 2 children. A daughter that she was pregnant with while she was on trial in 1966, who she named after her mother, was later adopted. Stephanie, who was 15 at the time, had all charges against her dropped as she agreed to testify against her family. She changed her name, married, had children, worked as a teacher, and now lives in Florida. You know, all of the things that Sylvia was not able to do. John, who was 12 when Sylvia died and was an active participant in her murder, served 2 years. He publicly showed remorse and was the only one who publicly showed remorse for what he did. He did not try to hide his identity. He was a minister. He was a real estate agent. He had a wife with 3 children. Again, all of the things that they took from Sylvia. He died of cancer in 2005 at the age of 52. The rest of her children were not charged, and her son, who was 1 year old at the time that Sylvia had died, was adopted. He died in 2012 in California. Coy Hubbard, who was Stephanie's boyfriend, served 2 years. He died in 2007 in Chevyville, Indiana. You never know when karma's gonna hit you. Karma was like, bet, I got you. Richard Hobbs, who helped carve "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it" into her stomach, received 2 years. He died of cancer in 1972 at the age of 21. Her father, Lester Likens, passed away in February 2013 at the age of 86. He was living in California at the time. Her mother, Elizabeth, who divorced her father and remarried, passed away on May 29th, 1998. She was 71 years old. And her sister, Jenny, who stayed in Indiana, she died in 2004 at the young age of 54. This was a really difficult case to research. This case was neck and neck for me with the Junko Furuta case, and it was just really sad. Would love to hear you guys' thoughts about this. Please post the comments below. You could also post case requests below, or you can email me at heygirlletstalkcrime@gmail.com. You could also find me on TikTok at heygirlletstalkcrime, where there are shorter versions of crime stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.